Let's start with Iran. It is officially in violation of the nuclear deal that it struck with 6 countries and the European Union, exceeding the limit on how much low-enriched uranium it can produce, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. This news comes more than a year after President Trump announced that the United States would exit the multilateral agreement, putting harsh sanctions back on Iran. So let's look at enriched uranium and why it matters. Natural uranium coming from mines typically has less than 1% of the isotope, U-235, known as a fissile isotope necessary for nuclear fission. The raw ore is then processed to extract the uranium. Now, one of the most efficient ways to do that is using centrifuges to spin the raw uranium at supersonic speeds, allowing the U-235 to separate out from the rest. Now, this separated uranium is called enriched uranium, and its use depends on the level of enrichment. Low enriched uranium, defined as being below 5% purity, is used in nuclear power reactors. Enriching uranium between 20 and 93% allows it to be used in research reactors. And once uranium is enriched to 90% or more, it is suitable for use in nuclear weapons. So remember, what we're talking about in Iran here is on the left of your screen, low enriched uranium. It's power reactor uranium. In 2015, the Iran nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, required Iran to ship all of its enriched uranium out of the country, getting raw uranium in return. Iran could then process that uranium ore, but it was limited to 660 pounds or less of the low-enriched uranium. That's relevant because that's 300 kilograms. And as a way to limit the processing, the country was restricted to just 5,060 centrifuges to enrich the mineral. Joining me now is Richard Haass. He's the president of the Council on Foreign Relations and NBC News' Tehran bureau chief, Ali Arouzi. Ali, let me start with you. Why is Iran now doing something that is in violation of the nuclear deal when, until today, if I'm not mistaken, they have been able to say that they have lived up to their obligations under the treaty, under the Iran deal?
That's right, Ali. Up until today, Iran had held back from breaching its commitments under the nuclear deal. It was a policy here that they had described as strategic patience. They knew that America had come out of the deal, that there was probably very little return for America coming back to the deal, but they wanted to see what they could get out of the Europeans. They wanted to see if the Europeans could shield them from U.S. sanctions, could allow them to sell their oil, their most important commodity, on the open market. It's become clear to the Iranians now, especially after a meeting in Vienna on Friday, that the Europeans really can't come up with the goods. They put in a special purpose vehicle called Instex to allow some humanitarian aid into Iran, and Iran said, you know what, this is just not simply enough. A credit line of a couple of $1 million is not going to cut it for this country. So that strategic patience has now run out, and I think the strategy here has changed from a defensive one to an offensive one. Now, this was the first step the Iranians are putting on the Europeans to try and turn things around in a very short period of time. It's not a huge breach, but it's a provocative breach. The next important milestone we have to look out for, Ali, is this coming Sunday. Iran said by Sunday that they are now going to ramp up their production of enriching uranium. If they decide to take that above that 20% threshold, which is so important, because going from what you talked about, that less than 1% to 20% is very difficult. Once you pass the 20% threshold, then you're on a very, very short path to the levels of uranium you need for a nuclear bomb. Now, Iran says they don't want one, but world power said, look, that's where the danger is. We don't want Iran to get past that 20%. If Iran suddenly announces on Sunday that they are going to go beyond the 20%, then I think the nuclear deal is over. UN sanctions will snap back onto Iran, and we are going to be in a very, very dangerous position. And I don't think we're going off that course, Ali. All the signs that I see in Iran is that they want to pursue now a very hard policy.
Ali Arouzi, our man in Tehran, thank you for that. Richard, until now, now, there were a lot of our allies who were in the deal who were arguing for maintaining the deal. They were not in favor of the U.S. position of pulling out of the deal. Does this make it harder for everybody else who was in that deal, for our European allies, to argue on behalf of staying in or maintaining or fixing some kind of a deal now that Iran has taken this step?
It makes it somewhat harder because this now refocuses attention around the world on Iran, even though there will be those in Europe and elsewhere who are going to argue, Ali, that the United States set in motion this chain of events. But we're back to a couple of options. One is, as you suggested, or Ali suggested, increased sanctions. There's always the option, though not a very attractive one, of using military force. There's a possibility of new diplomacy, where we could take the old agreement and try to amend it in certain ways and see if that would work. What the Iranians are obviously hoping is that this will frighten the world and that some of the world will basically move away from living up to U.S. sanctions.
Well, you know, Richard, a lot of people say President Trump probably doesn't want a war with Iran, and he's got some advisors, at least around him, who would recommend against that. What's your worst-case scenario here?
My worst-case scenario is either this leads ultimately to some military action on our part, or I can imagine another scenario where this is simply one of the many ways Iran is pushing back. They keep shooting at drones. Maybe this or that missile is fired by one of the militias in the region that are close to them. But sooner or later, they do something, whether with their nuclear program or militarily, where the United States feels it can't hold back like the president did the other day. And then we react militarily, and then we're basically off to the races. And what we would suddenly find that a lot of the Middle East would become part of a war, not simply Iranian territory, but all over the region.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.